text to speech. So if I have to be real quiet, I could just type in what I want to say and have it play back in some weird robot voice. So we watched a movie.
We did.
We watched it together.
Yeah, it was pretty neat.
Yeah. It was. It was called Neat. What was it called, John?
It was neat. It was really neat. Okay. All right, now I'm ready.
I'm Dan Carlson.
Hi, I'm John.
we are.
We're two kept men.
We're nifty.
We're really nifty. And we just are here now to present to you our review of the movie Neat.
Neat, the story of Bourbon.
The story of Bourbon.
What does the word neat when used in reference to bourbon mean?
The word neat in reference to bourbon is that it is served at room temperature in a glass with no ice or chilling or any kind of dilution or anything like that. It's just straight up bourbon whiskey in a sniffer kind of thing.
Yeah. What does the word "the" mean in the title?
There's no word "the" in the title.
It goes neat, the story of bourbon.
Oh, it refers to the fact that it is a thing. It's referring to it as in the story of bourbon.
What does story mean in this context?
It is referring to the telling of a history, fiction or nonfiction.
In this case, nonfiction.
A subject.
In this case,
bourbon.
Not nonfiction.
Bourbon story.
Okay.
Now,
what about the word "of"?
It is referring that it is in relation to the subject of the story.
And what does bourbon mean in this title?
Bourbon is a specific type of whiskey that is aged 25 years in a burned barrel, in a charred barrel.
That was one of the most interesting parts of this to me, is the length of time that goes by when they're making this stuff.
It's bourbon, not stuff.
Bourbon. The story of stuff.
The story of stuff. You know, one thing I would like to point out is that neither of us were drinking bourbon while watching Neat.
No, I had Jack Daniels, which is
you just
whiskey.
had standard whiskey.
So, yeah, what I was saying was one of the nicest things about the documentary is it really takes you into the whole length of time it takes to create the bourbon.
Yeah. I like the fact that it talks about how much time it takes for them to make the bourbon.
Seriously, though, I was actually kind of moved when they mentioned how like a guy could maybe only make three batches his whole life.
three batches, or taste three batches that he'd be able to taste three of his own batches that were aged to maturity. Yeah, because they said if you start at 20 years old, you're going to be 45 by the time you taste your first batch at its maturity. Then you're looking at 75
or 70, yeah,
or 70. And then if you're lucky 95 by your third batch.
And then if you're like
if you're like the oldest person on earth,
Maybe fourth
you'd
batch.
be at like 120 drinking bourbon in the old folks' home.
Hey, most of those people
It's
who
your
live those
bourbon.
age,
It's your fourth batch of bourbon, age to maturity. I'm fucking mature. I know what I'm. What is this shit? The
It's like
movie
with this-
was about what 76 minutes long,
something like that. Yeah,
but it felt like it was more like a 2-hour movie. But it was
did. I blame that on the actor they hired to.
is Steve Zahn. So the movie was good. I mean, it talked a little bit about, of course, the history of whiskey as improperly presented by Steve Zahn.
Yes, with surrounded by dead animals.
Yeah, he had like a dead fox on his lap at one point.
Yeah,
So it was a kind of an unfortunate attempt at adding a bit of a celebrity comedy into the movie.
and it takes up quite a large amount of the running time.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I mean, some of the good parts about this were that it really did go into the history of bourbon, and some of the rumors about how bourbon was begun went a little bit into Prohibition. Apparently, they, during Prohibition, they would take spirits. They would, for example, like rubbing alcohol, and they would like spit tobacco juice into it and add some food coloring and sugar and burned wood chips and shit like that, and then they'd put it through a filter and bottle it. And
Didn't they call it a gun? Didn't they call it the gun drink because it was so deadly?
The death drink.
Because it was so deadly.
Yeah, and because they were selling this shit during Prohibition, and it caused people to. I mean, it killed people.
Yeah,
apparently.
That's what it sounded like, anyway.
Yeah, and so in the 1964 was the watershed year for whiskey, or for bourbon, I should say, specifically, because it was declared that bourbon can only be made in America. So, in other words, if you get a whiskey that's made in charred barrels from Ireland, it's not bourbon. And so it kind of went into what goes into it as well. They talked about how they have people employed to actually go out and sample new types of whiskey, and they had this girl on that would go from bar to bar and from liquor store to liquor store and try the new
Jello shots.
Yeah. Oh, and the Jello shots somewhere in Tennessee, I think it was. And he makes Jello shots out of bourbon. He's like, well, it's not supposed to be enjoyed slowly. It's supposed to be Jello shot. Yeah.
He did enjoy. It did look good.
But I mean, some of they featured some of the bourbon moguls of the world, from various companies that have been around for ages. They had this one gentleman on that was a third generation employee of a bourbon company, and he was talking about how when his grandfather had rolled out the 6 millionth barrel of that bourbon, that he received a few bottles of that, and he said, I want to kind of keep some of this so we can toast later on, sometime down the line. His grandfather said to him, no, bourbon isn't meant to be, you're not meant to store old bourbon, it's meant to be enjoyed in the moment. And that
was something that we both really responded to.
That was pretty significant. Yeah. So while I have probably tasted bourbon in the past, I don't really recall when the last time I actually drank a bourbon neat. I may never have drank a bourbon neat. So now I think it's our duty at this point, after seeing this movie and sitting through the 76 minutes of it, that we go
Which felt like 2 hours.
Huh?
Which felt like
a 2-hour feature-length film, that we go get one of those little bottles of bourbon, just like a little hotel room bottle of bourbon, and drink it neat.
You just
yeah.
straight out of it?
No, got to put it in a glass, man.
Okay, right. Yep.
Yep.
Will
So
my Blade Runner 2049 glass be sufficient?
Oh yeah, more than. I just
It is what it is. It was neat.
it was neat.
I suppose if you're we only had a minor interest in it because it was something we saw was playing at the draft house. If you're actually in it
for free,
yeah, if you're actually an enthusiast, you probably would get a lot more out of it than we did.
You like bourbon? I'll bet you like bourbon, don't you? If you do, comment on in the comment section, and don't forget to like our video.
Oh, there was one moment in the movie where we saw some footage of the distillery moving the alcohol around in the big vat, and I thought it'd be really funny to hear a story about somebody that fell into it.
Yeah, and they still made the whiskey.
And they still made the whiskey and drank it. In fact, that was the best batch they had.
Best batch ever.